In the vast darkness between stars, desperation echoes across the void in frequencies both alien and achingly familiar. When the Zephyrian's final transmission reached Earth, it carried more than words. It carried the death rattle of an entire civilization. What they didn't know was that their cry for help had reached the one species in the galaxy that considered impossible odds merely an interesting challenge. The humans were coming. And they were absolutely furious. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0347 Galactic Standard Time, when most species were in their rest cycles. Ambassador Kethlar of the Zephyrian delegation stood before the assembled representatives, his normally pristine blue-scaled hide now dulled with exhaustion and terror. His secondary arms trembled as he activated the holographic display that showed his home system. Where Zephyria Prime should have been a gleaming jewel of civilization, there was now only debris and the hulking black forms of Harbinger ships. The massive vessels, each the size of a small moon, drifted through the wreckage like predators savoring their kill. The distinctive crimson glow of their harvesting beams could be seen even from the orbital surveillance stations that had somehow survived the initial assault. Honored delegates, Kethlar's voice cracked through the universal translator. My people are dying. 3 billion souls reduced to less than 50 million in the span of 6 rotations. The Harbingers came without warning, without negotiation. They simply began the harvest. The assembled representatives shifted uncomfortably in their various forms of seating. The Harbingers were legend, nightmare, the boogeyman parents used to frighten children across 1,000 worlds. They were the dark between stars made manifest, ancient beyond measure, and utterly without mercy. In their wake, they left nothing but empty worlds stripped of all biological matter. Chancellor Vexthi of the Altarian Republic, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, spoke first. Ambassador Kethlar, while we sympathize with your people's plight, the Council's military forces are simply insufficient to challenge a Harbinger fleet. Our combined navies number perhaps 12,000 vessels. The Harbinger's last recorded emergence involved over 100,000 ships. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Corellian delegate's tentacles writhed nervously as he accessed his datapad. The mathematical probabilities are clear. Any engagement with the Harbingers results in a 99.7% casualty rate for conventional forces. We must consider evacuation protocols instead. Kethlar's main arms clenched into fists. Evacuation? Where would we go? The Harbingers have blockaded every hyperspace lane out of our system. Our transport ships are being hunted down like prey animals. We cannot run and we cannot hide. We can only fight or die. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of galactic history. The last time the Harbingers had emerged from the void between galaxies, 17 civilizations had been completely extinguished. The survivors had spent centuries building weapons, fortresses, and fleets that they prayed would never be tested. Now that test had come, and they were all found wanting. Perhaps, suggested diplomat Yarthak of the Makari Coalition, his mechanical voice devoid of emotion but not unkind, we should consider reaching out to the peripheral species. Some of the younger races might be willing to provide assistance. Chancellor Vexthi's light patterns shifted to show skepticism. Which peripheral species could possibly stand against a threat that has us cowering? The Thexani barely have fusion technology. The Valdris are still fighting with chemical explosives. The humans... She paused, her crystalline structure flickering as she accessed racial databases. The humans are listed as a Class 7 Deathworld species. They have been spacefaring for less than 400 standard years. Their technology is primitive by our standards, though their expansion rate is notable. Ambassador Kethlar had been studying the peripheral species files during the debate. His species had always been thorough researchers, and desperation had made him more thorough still. The human homeworld, he said slowly, is classified as a Category 12 death world. The highest category we typically recognize is Category 8. The chamber fell silent again. Even the Harbingers avoided Category 8 death worlds. The energy expenditure required to harvest such planets was considered inefficient when easier prey was available. Category 12, repeated Chancellor Vexthi, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. That classification should be impossible. Nothing sentient should be able to evolve on such a world. Kethlar's datapad chirped as new information scrolled across its surface. His eyes, adapted for low-light conditions on his twilight world, widened as he read. According to this, their planet orbits a star that produces lethal radiation levels. The atmosphere contains a corrosive gas that should prevent complex life. The surface gravity is nearly twice what most species can tolerate. Tectonic instability causes regular volcanic activity and seismic events. The weather patterns include storms that generate electrical discharges powerful enough to kill most sapient species instantly. And yet they evolved there naturally, added diplomat Yarthak, his mechanical appendages clicking as he processed the data. No genetic engineering, no terraforming. They adapted to conditions that would kill most of us within minutes. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the humans had evolved on such a hellish world, what did that make them? Kethlar made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. I formally request permission to open diplomatic channels with the human government and ask for their assistance. The debate that followed lasted 3 standard hours. Some delegates argued that involving primitive species in galactic affairs was dangerous precedent. Others pointed out that the humans had no established colonies or trade routes to lose, making them uniquely positioned to take risks. A few simply noted that begging for help from anyone willing to listen was better than accepting extinction. The vote was close, 47 in favor, 42 opposed, with 16 abstentions. Permission was granted. While the Galactic Council had been debating, the situation in the Zephyrian system had deteriorated further. The Harbinger fleet had completed their harvest of the outer colonies and was now focusing on the remaining populated worlds. Their massive ships moved with deliberate precision, each one deploying thousands of harvesting pods that descended like metallic rain onto planetary surfaces. Kethlar returned to his embassy ship with authorization codes for transgalactic communication and a heavy heart. The nearest human colony was 3 months away at maximum hyperspace velocity. Even if they agreed to help, even if they mobilized immediately, would there be anything left to save by the time they arrived? The human embassy, on Galactic Station Theta 7, was a modest affair compared to the grand diplomatic complexes maintained by the elder races. It consisted of a simple geometric structure of metal and polymer, functional rather than artistic. The human ambassador was a middle-aged female named Sarah Chen, whose species' peculiar habit of changing their appearance with age fascinated xenobiologists. When Kethlar's request for emergency audience was received, Ambassador Chen had been reviewing trade agreements with the Altarian Republic. The sudden shift from commercial negotiations to existential crisis gave her what humans called mental whiplash. "Ambassador Kethlar," she said, gesturing for him to take a seat on one of the adjustable platforms designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. "I understand this concerns the Harbinger incursion in your system." The Zephyrian diplomat's exhaustion was evident in every line of his scaled form. "Ambassador Chen, my people are dying. The Galactic Council's forces cannot mount an effective defense. We are asking for any assistance your people might be able to provide." Chen's expression grew serious. Humans, Kethlar had learned from his briefing materials, were one of the few species that wore their emotions openly on their faces. It made them either very honest or very dangerous, depending on one's perspective. "I'll need to contact Earth immediately," she said. "This is far beyond my authority to approve. But I can tell you that humans don't abandon people in need. We'll find a way to help." The subspace communication to Earth took 6 hours due to distance and relay delays. During that time, Ambassador Chen compiled everything she could find about the Harbingers from both Galactic Council databases and humanity's own intelligence networks. What she found was deeply disturbing. The Harbingers were older than most current galactic civilizations. They operated on cycles measured in millennia, emerging from the void between galaxies to harvest biological matter before returning to their mysterious realm. Their technology was incomprehensible, their motives unknown, and their methods absolutely ruthless. When the response from Earth finally arrived, it was not what anyone expected. Ambassador Chen, the voice belonged to Fleet Admiral Morrison, commander of the Terran Navy's Deep Space Fleet. "We've reviewed the data you transmitted. The situation is grave, but not hopeless. We are mobilizing the Third Fleet immediately. Estimated arrival time at the Zephyrian system is 42 days. Chen felt her heart skip. The Third Fleet was humanity's most advanced naval formation, but it consisted of only 60 vessels. Against a Harbinger fleet numbering in the thousands, it would be a massacre. "Admiral," she said carefully, "are you certain 60 ships will be sufficient?" The pause that followed was filled with what sounded suspiciously like human laughter. 60 ships? Ambassador, you're looking at old deployment data. Since the discovery of quantum, Force Steel, and the completion of Project Prometheus, our shipbuilding capacity has increased somewhat. The Third Fleet now consists of 800 vessels, including 12 Titan-class battleships. Ambassador Chen's jaw dropped. The last time she'd reviewed fleet compositions, humanity had possessed perhaps 200 ships total. Admiral, forgive me, but how is that possible? When we learned about the Harbingers 5 years ago through intelligence channels, we began the largest military buildup in human history. Every asteroid mining station was converted to a shipyard. Every orbital factory was retooled for military production. We'd been preparing for this fight since we first heard the word Harbinger. The communication ended with coordinates and timetables. Admiral Morrison's final words echoed in the embassy's communication chamber. Tell the Zephyrians that help is coming. And tell the Harbingers that they picked the wrong species to mess with. As news of the human response spread through diplomatic channels, reactions varied wildly. Some species expressed admiration for humanity's willingness to help. Others worried about the implications of a species that could quintuple their military capacity in 5 years. A few wondered if the cure might prove worse than the disease. In the Zephyrian system, the Harbingers continued their methodical harvest, unaware that across the galaxy, the descendants of a Deathworld were preparing for war. The humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was an overwhelming offense, and they were about to demonstrate exactly what 800 ships crewed by the galaxy's most stubborn and vindictive species could accomplish when properly motivated. The countdown to humanity's arrival had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. As Ambassador Chen prepared her report for the Galactic Council, she reflected on something her grandfather had once told her. Never corner a human, and never threaten what they protect. Because when we decide to fight, we don't fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemy never threatens anyone ever again. The Harbingers were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The human fleet materialized at the edge of the Zephyrian system exactly 42 days after Admiral Morrison's promise. What emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen deployed in active combat. The lead vessel, the TNS Defiance, stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with weapon systems that seemed to bend physics around their mounting points. Behind it, 7 more Titan-class battleships formed a spearhead formation, their quantum steel armor gleaming like captured starlight. The escort vessels were equally impressive, but in different ways. Rapid attack destroyers, each one the size of most species' capital ships, flanked the formation in perfect geometric patterns. Cruisers designed for extended deep space operations maintained precise distances, their sensor arrays already gathering tactical data on the Harbinger fleet that occupied the inner system, and scattered throughout the formation were ships that defied easy classification. Vessels covered in exotic weapons systems and sensor equipment that existed nowhere else in known space. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, studying tactical displays that updated in real time. The man was tall even by human standards, with graying hair and scars from previous campaigns against pirates and hostile aliens. His expression was calm, professional, but his eyes held the cold fury that had made him legendary among his peers. "Tactical assessment, Commander Reyes," he said without taking his eyes off the main display. Commander Maria Reyes, his tactical officer, manipulated holographic controls that brought up a detailed analysis of the enemy fleet. "Sir, we're looking at approximately 2,300 Harbinger vessels of various classes. The largest appear to be what our databases classify as world eaters, massive ships designed for planetary consumption. They're currently harvesting the 4th planet in the system." Morrison nodded grimly. Intelligence reports had prepared him for this, but seeing it firsthand was different. The Harbinger ships moved with the methodical precision of insects, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. They had arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around Zephyria Prime, with harvesting operations proceeding on multiple fronts simultaneously. "Enemy force composition?" he asked. "Approximately 40 world eaters, each roughly 8 kilometers in length. 300 what appear to be heavy cruisers, about 2 kilometers each. The remainder are destroyer and frigate analogues, though their design philosophy is completely alien to anything in our databases." Admiral Morrison's communication officer, Lieutenant Park, looked up from his station. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Resistance. They're requesting immediate coordination. Put them through." The main screen shifted to show a Zephyrian command center carved into solid rock deep beneath the mountain range. The figure addressing them was Admiral Kethmore, military commander of the remaining Zephyrian forces. His blue scales were scarred and one of his secondary arms was missing, but his eyes burned with determination. "Human Admiral Morrison," Kethmore said, his translator struggling with the emotional undertones. "We are grateful beyond words for your arrival. However, I must inform you that our situation is desperate. The Harbingers have reduced our population to fewer than 20 million. Our orbital defenses are destroyed, and our remaining ground forces cannot hold much longer. Morrison's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well would have recognized the subtle tightening around his eyes that indicated his anger was reaching critical levels. Admiral Cathmore, what's your assessment of Harbinger capabilities? Their ships are heavily armored and armed with energy weapons that can shatter our strongest defenses. They seem immune to most conventional attacks. Their harvesting technology can strip a planet's biosphere in a matter of days. We have never seen anything like them. We have, Morrison said quietly. We've been studying records from their previous incursions for 5 years. We know their patterns, their weaknesses, and their limitations. The Zephyrian Admiral's eyes widened. Weaknesses? Admiral, with respect, 17 previous civilizations found no weaknesses. Morrison allowed himself a small, cold smile. 17 previous civilizations weren't human. The tactical briefing that followed revealed the extent of human preparation for this conflict. While the Galactic Council had viewed the Harbingers as an unstoppable natural disaster, humanity had approached them as a military problem to be solved through superior planning, technology, and tactical doctrine. The Harbingers operate on predictable patterns, Commander Reyes explained to the Joint Command Staff. They emerge from the galactic void, identify systems with significant biological resources, and systematically harvest everything useful. They rely on overwhelming numbers, superior technology, and the psychological impact of their reputation. She manipulated the holographic display to show detailed schematics of Harbinger vessels. However, our analysis reveals several critical vulnerabilities. First, their command structure is highly centralized. Each fleet operates under the direction of a single command ship, usually one of the World Eaters. Second, their harvesting operations require them to maintain fixed positions relative to target planets. Third, and most importantly, they've never faced an enemy that adapted their tactics specifically to counter Harbinger's strengths. Admiral Morrison took over the briefing. The Harbingers are used to fighting species that try to match them in direct confrontation, ship to ship, weapon to weapon. They win because their technology is superior and their numbers are overwhelming. But humans don't fight fair, and we don't fight alone. He gestured to the tactical display, which now showed the human fleet in detail. Every ship in this formation has been designed specifically to exploit Harbinger weaknesses. Our quantum force steel armor is designed to absorb and redirect their energy weapons. Our missile systems use AI guidance that can adapt to electronic countermeasures in real time. Most importantly, our tactical doctrine assumes we'll be outnumbered and outgunned. The Zephyrian officers listened with growing amazement as Morrison outlined the human battle plan. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a strategy that embraced apparent weakness and turned it into strength. Phase 1 involves surgical strikes against their command vessels using stealth technology they've never encountered. Phase 2 uses their predictable movement patterns against them. Phase 3, Morrison's smile turned predatory. Phase 3 is where we introduce them to human innovation. The first phase began 6 hours later. Human stealth destroyers, invisible to Harbinger sensors due to quantum phase cloaking systems, penetrated the enemy fleet perimeter. Their mission was not to engage in direct combat, but to gather detailed intelligence and identify primary targets. Captain Sarah Kim commanded the TNS Shadow, lead vessel of the stealth squadron. Her ship was a masterpiece of human engineering. Small, fast, and completely undetectable by conventional means. As they approached the Harbinger fleet, her sensor operator provided continuous updates. Captain, we're getting detailed scans of their command structure. The largest World Eater appears to be the fleet command vessel. It's maintaining position approximately 50,000 kilometers above Zephyria Prime's North Pole. Kim studied the tactical data flowing across her screens. The Harbinger command ship was massive beyond imagination, its dark hull bristling with weapons that could probably destroy entire planets. But it was also exactly where human intelligence had predicted it would be. Weapons, do you have targeting locks on the secondary command vessels? Affirmative, Captain. 14 heavy cruisers maintaining escort positions around the primary target. Quantum torpedoes are loaded and ready. Kim opened a channel to the fleet. Admiral Morrison, TNS Shadow is in position. All targets are marked and locked. Morrison's voice crackled back across the quantum communication link. Acknowledged, Shadow. All units execute Phase 1 on my mark. Mark. What happened next redefined naval warfare for every species in the galaxy. The human stealth destroyers fired simultaneously, their quantum torpedoes designed not to destroy their targets immediately, but to deliver specialized payloads. that would cripple Harbinger command and control systems. The torpedoes struck their targets with precision that bordered on the supernatural. Instead of the massive explosions expected from human weapons, they delivered something far more insidious: quantum viruses that began rewriting Harbinger computer systems from the inside out. Within minutes, the Harbinger fleet's perfect formation began to waver. Ships that had maintained precise positions for days suddenly found themselves drifting out of alignment. Communication networks that had functioned flawlessly for millennia began generating cascading errors. Most critically, the harvesting operations that had been proceeding with mechanical efficiency ground to a halt as automated systems received contradictory commands. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. All units prepare for Phase 2. The second phase began as the Harbinger fleet attempted to reorganize. Their response was exactly what human strategists had predicted: a concentrated assault on the human fleet's position using overwhelming firepower. 2,000 Harbinger ships turned their weapons toward the human formation and opened fire. Energy beams powerful enough to crack continents lanced across space, converging on the position where the human fleet had been moments before. They found empty space. The human formation had disappeared, not through some exotic technology, but through simple, superior maneuvering. While Harbinger vessels were massive and powerful, they were also slow and predictable. Human ships, designed for hit-and-run tactics against superior opponents, had scattered across the system in carefully planned patterns. All units, commence harassment pattern Alpha, Morrison ordered. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. Instead of the traditional exchange of massive firepower between battle lines, the humans implemented a strategy that their ancestors had used against superior opponents for millennia: guerrilla warfare adapted for space combat. Human destroyers materialized at the edge of Harbinger formations, delivered precise strikes against specific systems, then vanished back into hyperspace before enemy fire could find them. Cruisers used the system's asteroid belt as cover, emerging to launch missile salvos before disappearing behind chunks of rock and metal. The massive Titan-class battleships remained hidden, waiting for their moment while smaller ships performed a deadly dance around their confused enemies. The Harbingers, accustomed to enemies that stood and fought, found themselves unable to come to grips with an opponent that refused to engage on their terms. Their massive weapons were designed to destroy capital ships and planetary defenses, not to track highly maneuverable targets that appeared and disappeared without warning. On Zephyria Prime, the Resistance forces watched in amazement as human tactics confused and frustrated their seemingly invincible enemies. Admiral Cathmore found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about space warfare. "How are they doing this?" asked his tactical officer, watching human ships appear and disappear across multiple sensor readings. "They're not fighting the Harbingers," Cathmore said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're making the Harbingers fight themselves."
It was true.
Human attacks were precisely calculated not just to cause damage but to force predictable responses. When Harbinger ships moved to counter one threat, they exposed themselves to another. When they concentrated their forces to protect key assets, they left other areas vulnerable. The humans were conducting a symphony of destruction, and the Harbingers were dancing to their tune without realizing it. After 6 hours of Phase 2 operations, the Harbinger fleet had lost over 300 vessels without landing a single effective hit on a human ship. Their perfect formation had dissolved into chaos as individual commanders tried to respond to threats that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Admiral Morrison chose that moment to initiate Phase 3. "All Titan units, decloak and assume attack formation. Today we finish this." The 8 Titan-class battleships materialized in perfect formation at the heart of the Harbinger fleet, their quantum phase cloaking fields dissipating to reveal vessels that redefined the concept of warship. Each Titan stretched over 4 kilometers in length, their hulls composed of experimental quantum force steel that seemed to bend light around its edges. But it wasn't their size that made experienced space commanders across the galaxy pause in amazement. It was the weapons they carried. The lead Titan, TNS Defiance, powered up its primary armament for the first time in combat conditions. The Stellar Lance was humanity's answer to impossible odds, a weapon that channeled the power of a small star through quantum tunneling effects, creating a beam that could theoretically cut through any known material in the universe. Admiral Morrison stood on the Defiance's bridge, watching as targeting computers painted solutions across the tactical display. Around him, his crew worked with the calm efficiency of professionals who had trained for this moment their entire careers. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as systems that had existed only in theory mere years ago came online at full combat readiness. "Admiral," reported Commander Reyes, All Titan units report ready. Primary targets have been designated. We have clear firing solutions on all 8 World Eaters currently in range. Morrison nodded, his expression calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Humanity had spent 5 years preparing for this battle, converting their entire industrial base to military production, developing weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Now it was time to see if their preparations had been sufficient. "Signal the Zephyrian resistance," he ordered. "Tell them to take cover, full-spectrum shielding activated. All units, you may fire when ready." What happened next would be recorded in the histories of every spacefaring civilization for thousands of years to come. 8 stellar lances fired simultaneously, their beams invisible to the naked eye, but devastating to anything caught in their path. The energy streams crossed space at near light speed, each one targeted at a specific weak point in Harbinger World Eater armor that human analysis had identified. The first World Eater to be struck simply ceased to exist. The stellar lance didn't destroy it in any conventional sense. The weapon converted matter directly into energy, causing the massive vessel to collapse into a brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the system's star. The second World Eater suffered a different fate as the beam severed its command section, leaving the remainder of the ship spinning helplessly through space. One by one, the remaining World Eaters were methodically destroyed or disabled. The weapons that had terrorized 17 civilizations proved utterly inadequate against human innovation driven by pure, calculated fury. The effect on the Harbinger fleet was immediate and devastating. For the first time in their recorded existence, they found themselves facing an enemy that could match and exceed their technological capabilities. Ships that had operated for millennia with absolute confidence suddenly found themselves vulnerable, their invincibility revealed as nothing more than the absence of adequate opposition. But the humans weren't finished. As the Titan battleships engaged the largest Harbinger vessels, the rest of the human fleet emerged from their hit-and-run tactics to implement the final phase of their assault plan. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the TNS Retribution, one of humanity's newest heavy cruisers designed specifically for this engagement. Her ship represented 5 years of intensive research into Harbinger technology, incorporating captured systems and reverse-engineered components into a vessel that was part human engineering, part alien technology, and completely lethal. "All batteries, fire at will," she commanded as her ship engaged a formation of Harbinger heavy cruisers. The Retribution's weapons systems included humanity's latest innovation, adaptive plasma cannons that analyzed enemy defenses in real time and modified their output to exploit specific weaknesses. The Harbinger ships responded with their traditional overwhelming firepower, energy beams that should have reduced any human vessel to ionized particles. Instead, they found their weapons striking quantum-enhanced armor that absorbed their energy and redirected it back at them through humanity's newest tactical doctrine, defensive reflection systems. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human tactical innovation met Harbinger brute force. Ships that had seemed invincible for millennia found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought by opponents they had dismissed as primitive savages. On Zephyria Prime, the surviving population watched through orbital sensors as their salvation unfolded above them. Admiral Kethmore stood in his underground command center, hardly able to believe the tactical displays showing human forces systematically dismantling a Harbinger fleet. "Admiral," reported his sensor operator, "the humans are coordinating their attack with precision I've never seen. Every move appears calculated to maximum effect. They're not just winning, they're dominating." Kethmore watched as another Harbinger World Eater exploded under concentrated fire from 3 human Titans. "They're fighting like they've done this before. How is that possible?" The answer came through a communication channel from Admiral Morrison himself. "Admiral Kethmore, we've learned something important about the Harbingers. They're not invincible. They're just very, very old. Age brings complacency. They've relied on the same tactics for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt." Morrison's image on the communication screen showed a man completely in control of the situation. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiance hummed with activity as his crew managed the destruction of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. More importantly, Morrison continued, they made a critical error in judgment. They assumed that because we're young and our technology appears primitive, we would be easy prey. They failed to understand the fundamental truth about humanity. We don't just adapt to impossible odds, we thrive on them. As if to emphasize his point, a massive explosion lit up space nearby as another Harbinger vessel succumbed to human weapons. The tide of battle had turned so completely that what had begun as a desperate rescue mission was becoming a systematic extermination of an ancient threat. The Harbinger command ship, The massive vessel that had coordinated the harvest of 17 civilizations finally began to respond to the unprecedented threat it faced. Ancient systems that had remained dormant for thousands of years came online as the entity that commanded the fleet realized it was facing genuine opposition for the first time in its existence. The ship began to change, its hull flowing like liquid metal as hidden weapons systems emerged from within its structure. Energy readings spiked to levels that made even human sensors struggle to maintain lock. This was the Harbinger fleet's final gambit, their command vessel's full combat potential unleashed. Admiral Morrison watched the transformation with interest rather than concern. Fascinating. Commander Reyes, are our special weapons ready? The Singularity Lance is charged and ready, Admiral. All support ships are standing by. The Singularity Lance was humanity's most ambitious weapon, a device that created microscopic black holes and used them as projectiles. It had never been tested against a target this large, but then again, humans had always been willing to try things that other species considered impossible. Fire. The weapon that struck the Harbinger command ship defied easy description. The Singularity Lance didn't simply destroy its target, it created a gravitational anomaly that consumed the massive vessel from within. The ancient ship, which had survived the death of stars and the birth of new civilizations, collapsed into a point of infinite density and then vanished, taking with it the accumulated knowledge and malice of eons. The effect on the remaining Harbinger fleet was immediate and complete. Without their command ship, the individual vessels began to retreat, their coordinated tactics dissolving into panic. Ships that had operated as a unified force for millennia suddenly found themselves acting as individuals, and individuals could be hunted down one by one. All units pursue and destroy, Morrison ordered. We're not letting any of them escape to threaten another world. The hunt that followed lasted 3 days. Human ships, designed for extended operations in deep space, pursued fleeing Harbinger vessels to the edges of the system and beyond. Advanced sensor networks tracked every enemy ship, while quantum communication ensured perfect coordination between pursuit groups. When it was over, not a single Harbinger vessel remained functional. Some had been destroyed in combat, others disabled and captured for study. A few had attempted to self-destruct, but found even that option denied them by human jamming technology. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of human preparation. Engineering ships emerged from hyperspace, beginning immediate repair of damaged Zephyrian infrastructure. Medical vessels landed on the planet's surface, providing aid to survivors with equipment that surpassed anything in Galactic Council databases. Most impressive of all, massive transport ships began arriving with prefabricated colonies, prepared to house refugees until their world could be restored. Admiral Morrison stood in the same underground command center where Admiral Kethmore had coordinated the resistance, but now it served as the coordination point for reconstruction efforts. The Zephyrian commander watched in amazement as human efficiency turned to the tasks of peace with the same devastating effectiveness they had shown in war. Admiral Morrison, Kethmore said, my people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. But I must ask, how did you know you could defeat them? Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. We didn't know, Admiral. We hoped, we prepared, and we planned, but we didn't know. The thing about humans is that we don't let not knowing stop us from trying. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the cleaned battlefield and the beginning of reconstruction efforts. 5 years ago, we learned about the Harbingers and made a decision. We could either cower and hope they never found us, or we could prepare to fight them. Humans don't cower well, so we chose to fight. The report Admiral Morrison filed with Galactic Council headquarters was a masterpiece of tactical analysis and strategic planning. It detailed not just the battle itself, but the 5-year preparation that had made victory possible. The document would become required reading at every military academy in known space. But it was his final paragraph that resonated most strongly with those who read it. The Harbingers were defeated not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by something they had never encountered in their millennia of conquest, an enemy that refused to accept defeat as inevitable. They had grown comfortable in their supremacy, forgetting that the universe always produces new challenges to old orders. Humanity was that challenger, and we were honored to answer that call. News of the victory spread through galactic civilization within days, carried by the fastest communication networks available. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had cowered in fear at the mention of Harbinger fleets suddenly found themselves looking to the peripheral regions of space with new interest. Ambassador Chen found herself at the center of a diplomatic revolution. Her embassy, which had been a modest affair suited to a junior species, was suddenly receiving requests for formal audiences from every major civilization in the galaxy. The Altarian Republic wanted to discuss defense treaties. The Makari Coalition proposed technology exchanges. Even the ancient Ithari, who hadn't spoken to anyone for 3,000 years, sent a formal message of recognition. But perhaps the most significant change was in how humans saw themselves. For generations, they had been the newcomers, the primitives, the species that other civilizations tolerated but didn't take seriously. The Battle of Zephyria changed that forever. Humanity had proven itself not just as warriors, but as the kind of species that stood between the darkness and the light. 6 months after the battle, as reconstruction of Zephyria Prime neared completion, Admiral Morrison received a message that would have been impossible to imagine before the Harbinger War. The Galactic Council formally invited humanity to join as a full member species, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. The vote hadn't even been close. Unanimous approval from every delegate present. Standing on the observation deck of the rebuilt Zephyrian orbital station, Morrison watched human and Zephyrian ships working together to place the final atmospheric processes. The partnership between the two species had grown into something unprecedented. A true alliance based on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Ambassador Kethlar joined him at the viewing port, his scales now bright with health, and his missing arm replaced with a prosthetic of human design. Admiral, I've been wondering about something. When you first arrived, you said that 17 previous civilizations weren't human. What did you mean? Morrison smiled, the expression carrying equal parts satisfaction and warning. I meant that they approached the Harbingers as a natural disaster to be endured or fled from. Humans don't flee from natural disasters. We figure out how to stop them, redirect them, or eliminate them entirely. It's what we do. He gestured toward the fleet of ships working together in peaceful cooperation. The Harbingers made the same mistake that every bully eventually makes. They assumed that because they were strong and we were small, we would submit. They forgot that sometimes the small ones fight back, and when humans fight back, we don't stop until the threat is completely eliminated. As they watched, a formation of human ships departed the system, carrying Harbinger technology and captured vessels back to Earth for study. The war was over, but humanity's transformation from galactic newcomers to galactic protectors was just beginning. The message was clear to anyone watching. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The species that had evolved on a death world had proven that sometimes the best response to impossible odds was not surrender, but overwhelming, calculated violence, applied with surgical precision and absolute determination. The Harbingers were gone. The harvest was ended, and across the galaxy, those who had cried out for salvation in their darkest hour learned that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sends exactly what is needed. Even if what's needed is a fleet of ships, crewed by the descendants of a world that should have killed them long ago. Humanity had answered the call, the galaxy was safe. And everyone involved understood that this was only the beginning of humanity's role as the species that stood guard against the darkness between stars.